It's 5:30, Frank J. Parisi. Do you know what that means?
I do.
It means, let's roll 'em. We are live from Studio 87B here in lovely downtown East Northport. I am Cliff Sobel, host of Anatomy of an Entrepreneur. We have a fantastic show today, and I'm going to tell you why. Because Lori Kay is back in the house.
God. You are so...
Frank, a little applause for Lori Kay.
Oh my
Lori
gosh.
Kay's back in the house. Unfortunately, Joel Lavolsi cannot make it today. He had a paying gig again. It's not really nice. But we do have a great show. I'm going to take care of a little housekeeping first. Lori, if you don't mind. Do you mind?
No.
Okay.
All right. I'm like, what? I'm doing the housekeeping tonight?
would like
I was
you
like,
to, but
wait,
no,
what?
I know you don't know.
Nope, have at it.
Okay, Lori, this show is brought to you by My Instant Office. If you need a desk, a chair, a conference room to work by the day, the week, or the month, come on in, sit down, and get to work. You can find us at myinstantoffice.net. Do you realize in the year and a few months since we've been doing this show, I've never said the website address to My Instant Office? So how would anybody find it? They wouldn't. This show is also brought to us by the Huntington Chamber of Commerce. Lori Kelleher,
Yes.
did you know that the Huntington Chamber of Commerce is
The largest chamber of commerce
on Long Island?
on Long Island. I do know that.
Yeah. At the Fall Festival, they get over 250,000 people. And I was once talking to Courtney Bino, who's the associate director, and I said, Courtney, I need something to say about the chamber. And she said, just tell everybody it's the best darn chamber in the world. So that's it. So now we can get on with the show.
Okay.
I am very honored to have here Larry Lipicoli, who has quite a career, starting with shoemaking, all the way to superintendent of Peekskill Schools in Peekskill, New York.
Right.
Peekskill City School.
District.
City District?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Peekskill City School District.
Okay. Anyway, I'd like to introduce Larry. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bless you.
And it's Lipicoli.
Oh, all these years I've been pronouncing it wrong? Well, you know what? I wanted to call you Lorenzo, but you go by Larry.
Well, most of my friends call me Larry.
They do? Okay. So, Larry Lipicoli, it sounds better anyways, better ring. Usually we start off by asking our guests to give us like just a 1-minute overview of who they are. They have a difficult time sticking to the 1 minute, but I do ask for just a little overview of who you are.
Well, I am a second generation from Italian immigrants who immigrated here, and my dad came here in the early 1920s, and it was totally the American dream, following the melting pot. There was no work where he was. He served in the Italian army in World War I. And
Wow.
the reason he came here was simply, and I'm going to get this in 1 minute. The reason he came here is that there was no work for Italian men at that point in time. It's like 1920.
We're in Italy.
He was in Calabria, Reggio Calabria.
Okay.
And what happened was that the government offered free passes for men to come to the United States. And he took it and
And he went.
he came. Right.
That's pretty cool.
And he had a prearranged marriage with a woman from his hometown. He went home to marry her, met my mother in Venice, married my mother instead, and then 6 months later, he came back because he didn't have enough money to pay for her affair, so he came back, earned enough money, sent her the money for a ticket, and she arrived here in Mineola at the time, 1931.
Uh-huh.
And his hope was that his children would profit from the American dream, which was, believe, in his mind, a life that was better than his.
It's actually pretty fascinating to hear those types of stories about how life-altering people, how life changes on a dime,
Yeah.
right? And change the course of history for your whole family.
Yeah, yeah.
That's pretty cool. Speaking of childhood, we did a lot of digging and we found a picture. We found a picture, except Frank can't find the picture, but we did find the picture. Is it in the system, Frank?
Yeah, I brought it in.
So, you weren't born in Mineola though. You lived in Floral Park when you were a kid.
Right, right. But when I was born, we were in Floral Park, right.
So when you were born, you were in Floral Park.
My older two brothers were born in Mineola.
Gotcha. And your dad, by that point, had already been in business for a while.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Since he opened his first store in 1924.
What did he do?
He was a shoemaker, from a family of shoemakers.
How far, like generations?
Well, we go back, I can go back to my great-great-grandfather, and as I understand it, he was a shoemaker. And then my great-grandfather was a shoemaker, my grandfather was a shoemaker, and my dad was a shoemaker.
I read a story on your webpage, which we'll get into in a little while, about how your dad had this boot in the front of the store, or a shoe in front of the store.
Right, right.
And that was kind of your guide
Yes.
of
yeah.
what you had to aspire to.
Right.
Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, I mean, it was for me, actually. My three older brothers and I all worked in the store at one point in time. And of the four brothers, I just liked repairing shoes. And I preferred doing that rather than like taking care of customers. So my dad taught me how to repair, replace heels, and that was kind of like my specialty. He wouldn't let me do soles and all that stuff because you had to put them on a machine. You really had to know what you were doing.
Yeah.
But on the more simple work, I would do the work, and let's say if it was a pair of heels or women's shoes or men's shoes, and in the beginning I would have to go to him and show him the shoe before it could go on the rack. And but he would always tell me to go to the model shoe, and then for me to analyze my work against the shoe, and then come back to him. And then we would kind of like talk about it for a couple of minutes, and he would ask me, do you think this is ready to go? And in the beginning, most times I would say no, because I could see where the flaws were.
Right.
And then I would
But at
fix
least you
it.
could see where the flaws
Oh,
were.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's pretty
yeah.
good that you could see where the
Yeah,
flaws
but
were.
he wasn't going to tell me what was ready to go. He wanted me to figure that out on my own. And I think that's really a good business
Yeah.
strategy in terms of any employee.
It also set a good example for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. And he wanted the products from his store to be of high quality at all times.
Right. So I guess that's what you learned from a young age.
Very young. I mean, I was probably like 12 years old when that
Wow.
point started. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Frank, do we have that picture now?
Yes.
Could you bring that picture up when Larry was a child? I love that picture. I'm sure you weren't a vegetarian at that point.
No.
Are we talking Thanksgiving there?
That was Thanksgiving in like 1953 and 1954.
Wow, that's like 65 years ago.
Yeah, that makes me 70.
So, okay, you're doing good. So, can we go back to that picture a second? What was going on? Do you remember that picture being taken? Or you remember
it was, it's kind of in our family tradition. My parents were close to 2 or 3 other Italian families. So during holidays, we would always kind of like rotate between Easter, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. We'd go to everyone else's houses. And these were kind of like paisans of my father and mother. And so it was always great fun.
Yeah.
And all the kids would be there, and we had the giant kids table, and all the, the mothers were like the engineers of the kitchen, and It was several days of preparation before this huge feast, and it was just so much fun. And that picture, as I'm looking at it, I think I have this giant grin on my face because
You do.
I was just like, this is like one of the happiest things that could happen,
That's so awesome.
And my
We
mother
used to
was.
have kids' tables. They don't have that anymore. But
They
we-
don't?
No, in my family, we had the kids sat at the kids' table.
Yeah, we had that too.
We had the kids' table.
Yeah, it was
but
fun.
Who has a kids' table now?
No,
go to
you don't
rest-
see that too
You don't
often.
see that anymore.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
not at all.
don't.
But that's really good. What a great memory. And I'm going to go back to one thing about your dad, Woody, how he set an example for you. In entrepreneurialism, it's very important to have good support system and have good examples set for you. And you had that. And that gives you the confidence to move to the next step when you have that support mechanism. So I'm going to guess you got that, yes?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. In many respects, the essential things, the depth that I learned from my father in that experience, I think I fully experienced decades later.
Makes sense.
I got some basics. I got basics in terms of that it's very important, for him, it was very important to have high quality work. It was very important to have a positive relationship with your customers.
Right.
And, in my memory, even when my brothers and I talk about our dad, there were like very few people who, we couldn't think of anyone that would ever think ill of my father. He was so well respected. And he was not a gregarious person. He was a pretty quiet person. And he was one of those people, when he spoke, people would listen because that's when he would have something to say. And he was very, he played the guitar. He loved to sing. So when we would go to work with him in the morning, he'd start singing in the car right to the store. When we moved to Syosset, when Syosset was still like a one wagon town.
Right.
We would drive to work straight on Jericho Turnpike, and he would sing the entire way, to the store, and he was a very happy man. And then at 6:30, sing all the way back, and he would try and teach me all these Italian, folk songs and all that stuff, and it was great.
So, but what was the epiphany that hit you decades later?
Well, here it is. I learned, and I think in your work as in terms of this mindfulness, in terms of the relationships with executives and in a kind of way like coaching people and learning from people and their relationships, is that there is a language that my father had in his business that reflected commitment to his work, and he was a shoemaker, and when he quote retired, he still was a shoemaker.
Right.
He worked until he was in his 80s, just for private people and all that stuff, and there was passion for his work, and he loved that, and he also knew the type of shoemaker he would need to be in order to be successful. So he had those relationships. He lived them.
So when did it hit you?
So I think it hit me probably as I was getting into my late 50s and early 60s.
Really?
Because I had I had the things about quality. I mean, all the school districts that I worked in and led, I was very strong in what you call continuous improvement. So I worked really hard in using measurable, I tried to figure out what's the most important thing for us to measure. And I would work with our staff and try and figure that out. And those measurements would become the markers that we would use to say, to enable us to figure out how we're improving and how we're growing.
Right.
And to me, particularly like in most organizations, but in school organizations where they're all people organizations. It's a human business between kids and staff, and it's actually really focused on kids and their learning experience. I mean, you always have to think about your capacity to be innovative. And if you're not thinking about what you're doing, the innovation part, you can become very comfortable with the status quo.
Right.
So, I always worked on those measurements and try to get people to understand that, you know, what we can measure really can get done, and we have to have a laser type focus on our kids. But later on,
That's That's when it
later on I started to realize I needed to. There is a language in that relationship,
mm-hmm.
And some of the later research, excuse me, that came out, focused on this. How do people speak and behave in schools or any organization that really thrives, where people fully understand how their part of this organization adds value and why it's important, and what do they need to do to keep that going without being told what to do. So it's something like this. Sometimes when you're trying to break somebody, you're trying to train somebody. The person who's being trained can say to themselves, just tell me what to do and how to do it, as opposed to, why do I need to do this, and what kind of things do I need to learn about
mm-hmm.
in order to achieve that?
So did they figuratively have the shoe?
Well, I once used that example at a superintendent's conference day. And now, of course, the variables that are involved in teaching are the complexity is far greater. It's nothing that's stable. But the example was clear. Now, there is a standard in terms of instruction and in terms of kids learning that definitely has application with respect to what we're doing.
Did you know, like, at a young age that you wanted to go into school systems, or that you wanted to be a superintendent? Like, had it?
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed being a teacher.
Oh, so you were a teacher first?
Yeah, I taught for 12 years.
Okay.
I was also a union president, and it was like one of the things. I was a union representative. I was 23, 24 years old, and the current union president said, "Look, I'm retiring. I need somebody to step forward." And it's like everyone stepped backwards, and I was the only one in the front of the line.
Right.
So that's kind of how I got into that. But it was a great learning experience. And then I had an opportunity. I was thinking about going on a sabbatical, which was you rarely see sabbaticals now.
Oh, really?
So I had an opportunity to take a year off for any type of study. It had to be, and I was accepted at a law school, at Albany Law School. This was like in '78. And then I was looking at doctoral programs as well. And then I thought about it, and I felt like my heart would be more in education as a leader and
So
a thinker.
you were already passionate about education.
Yes. What attracted me about law had to do with social justice.
Right.
That would be the civil rights. That would be the area that I probably would have wanted to have gotten into.
Right. But you followed your passion.
Yeah.
You could have gone either way, I guess, but you really loved education.
Yeah, and just being around kids is just terrific.
What is it that you like about that?
Well, it's every day something's happening. Like in an elementary building, for example, every day some child is learning something. Like there's this little energy that goes, pew, and you're experiencing that, and
really
you're
cool.
creating that environment for that to happen.
Right. So you go back to school for a doctorate in education.
Yeah.
And then do you go back out and you're teaching, or are you now following an administrative path?
Well, I kind of when I came back, I accepted a teaching position with the BOCES, which is the Board of Cooperative Educational Services, and they started a new class for highly emotionally disturbed children, and I decided I wanted to be challenged with that. I was also a social studies teacher, and I had an opportunity to teach social studies as well as being a special ed teacher. So I took this class on, and it was probably my most challenging teaching assignment. Primarily because most of the kids in the class, came from very, very tough backgrounds. Their life experiences were, really, really tough. And it was hard. I had to learn I had to see their lives through them. Mm-hmm. And, that African saying, we say hello, how are you? In Nigeria, they say, I see you, which means you see them through their experience.
Right.
And which I tried to bring into my leadership practice, and communicating and working with my teachers, is to see your kids through them, through their eyes.
But it still must have been very challenging. And how do you deal with that type of a challenge? How do you get, there must have been rough days.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you deal with those? How do you deal with those rough days? How do you deal with those challenges?
Well, fortunately, when I was able to be surrounded by people of similar interest in mind, and we would debrief a lot. We would talk about the students a lot. I had two teaching assistants who were actually qualified teachers, but they worked with me in this particular class, and we often would spend an hour and a half after school, after the last student left.
Right.
But at the same time, we did things that teachers, I'm not judging it, but we would make home visits, with all of our students. We would check in. We didn't have things like email and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. We didn't text them, how's everything going, So we had, we used the rotary phone.
Right.
And, but we that's how we kept relationships, with our students. And oftentimes some of the parents would call us on the weekend if they were in a stressful situation with their child, and we would make ourselves available to help. And
You have
so
to be
we did
very
those things.
passionate. You have to be very, very passionate to be working all those extra hours to do that.
And we learned a lot about trying to raise a child that has that might have a disability or a learning impairment. When you work close with their parents, sometimes it's easy to judge what a
Right.
parent might do or not do.
Right.
But then if you're in the home with the child, you can see that dynamic in a way that you can never from a distance.
And then you kind of moved on and you got into administration from there.
Yeah,
What was the?
I kind of went to I was in my early 30s, and I took a position as a coordinator, a special education coordinator, and I had responsibility for about 50 teachers in different programs across 3 counties. And then about a year or two later, I had an opportunity to become a director of special education, which I did in the Cohoes City School District, which led to me becoming the assistant superintendent for educational services. And Cohoes was a poor city school district that 90% of the kids were on free and reduced lunch.
Mm-hmm. How do you? It's hard in those situations. I know that I've taught in certain situations where the kids really did not want to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like a big fail. How do you deal with those failures and move ahead?
Well, I always found that in that scenario is that kids who have that type of experience and express it, their personal hypothesis as a learner is that this is something I fail at. And they have a history of it. So it's like anything else in life. If you have a hobby, I'm presuming that I know kind of like what your hobbies are.
Yes.
You wouldn't do it, number one, if you were kept on failing at it.
No.
Or you weren't being successful.
Right.
So if you have a student who starts failing grades, in first grade, second grade, third grade, and invariably the causality of that is probably in the area of literacy and reading, And if you keep on, and if that gap between you as a literate person increases over time, in other words, now you're going into ninth grade and your reading level is at sixth grade, you are at a tremendous gap for you to try and make up and be successful, with a high school curriculum. And unfortunately, that can happen to a lot of kids. So that typically is that kind of kid that you just mentioned.
Right. And
So you have to change the script.
yeah, that's what I was just going to say. How do you change the script?
Well, you have to say, first of all, you got to go back to passion. You got to go back to commitment. We have to show the child how it is, what he or she needs to do to be successful, and we can't give him the work that he's already failed in. So you have to start kind of like from a new beginning.
Right, but so at that point they're demotivated. How do you motivate them?
Well, part of the motivation is just to have a couple of successes.
So maybe even small successes.
Yeah, small successes and working in areas that they like.
Right. So, so that was but that probably, while it was very challenging, probably was a great experience for you to carry forward as you continued your career.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. You guys will love this. This is 19. Can I talk to them like that? Or
You can talk to whoever you don't have to look at if you want to look at the camera, you can look at Lori. You can do whatever you want.
So this is this is a true story. So in 2011, I was the superintendent in Peekskill, and we had 25 kids from Ecuador move into the district on that first week of school. I was just appointed as a superintendent. I walk in there and I see these young people. I'm saying hello. And meanwhile, they don't speak a word of English. Don't speak, and now to make it even more challenging, they came from tiny, remote villages. 2 weeks ago, they were in a tiny, remote village in Ecuador, where they had their own dialect of Spanish. I mean, even our Spanish people couldn't understand their Spanish.
Oh, wow.
Because it was so remote. And now they made their way here, and they made their way to Westchester County in New York. 2 weeks ago, they were in a tiny village. Now they're in an American high school. They're getting a schedule, and we're putting them into the core courses.
So you think you're putting them into the core courses.
And now all of the staff, and we're all looking at each other, this isn't right.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot. It happens all over. And so we knew we were about to do something that was not going to serve these kids at all. So we had to very quickly change their experience.
Business is the same way, by the way.
Yeah. So that's what we did. We changed their experience, and we made their experience through what they knew.
And then when you make the experience through what they know, do you then start to modify it?
Yeah. You bring it into our curriculum.
How did you communicate with them?
Well, we did have Spanish-speaking teachers. Over time, what we did in Peekskill is that we created we visited a couple schools who did extraordinary work with the students who were immigrating into their school system. And so we did a lot of on-site visits, and we learned a lot from these school districts. But essentially, what we focused on is, with our Spanish speaking, our goal was to help kids get to English very quickly. So not only did we immerse them in English, but we created like a bilingual. It wasn't officially a bilingual program, but we recruited teachers who spoke Spanish and English. And it was preferred that they were duly certified. And so we created sections for these particular kids so that they could get, English and American history and science and math in both languages. But also at the same time, we modified greatly modified the curriculum so that it was a curriculum that was appropriate for them.
Gotcha. I get the feeling that not only aren't you intimidated by these like challenges that just pop up, but you embrace them and you like them.
Well, I don't have, I want to rise to the occasion. I mean, I want to, not because I like rising to the, well, maybe I do, but the fact is it needs to be done.
Right. How do you, I mean, things slip through the cracks at times.
Yes.
How do you reduce that?
Well, in my form of leadership, I try and create safety nets at all times. And for me, the unit of analysis is not like a classroom or like this group of 20 kids. The unit of analysis, the
Right.
kid, is a kid. So I go right down to the, to the micro unit.
Right. Wow.
So that means every kid we have to assess every kid,
Right.
not as a group, but as an individual.
Right.
And even then, a kid can fall through the cracks.
Right. Well,
So there is a human dimension that, there's a randomness
Right.
just because we're people that we can make mistakes. So you accept that. We're just trying to keep them as low as
Right.
possible.
so now Lori, are there any questions or do you have any questions?
No, I'm listening.
Okay. So you've gone through this career path, which is pretty freaking amazing that you became superintendent of several school districts.
Right,
4 school districts. You were superintendent of those 4 school districts for many, many years. And now you've decided to retire, but now you want to work again.
Well, I kind of retired. I thought I retired in 2015 for the last time, but I was doing some consulting work, which I enjoyed. And then I got called back in 2017 to Peekskill, an unfortunate situation, but I stayed there for a couple of months. And then I worked, they asked me to stay on to help them with their transformational planning, which was one of my initiatives that I started. And I coached the high school principal, a internal interim superintendent, while we led a search for a new superintendent, which I was part of the search team.
Right.
And I'm finishing up in Peekskill now as a
Gotcha.
consultant.
But so where I was getting at is that you want to take on, you're staying in education, but now you're taking on a completely new role.
It's a different role, yeah.
New role.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited about that.
Can you describe that to us?
Well, it's not that I haven't, being a candidate for a board of education is not exactly alien to me, since I've calculated that I've sat on the dais over 800 times, in terms of board of education meetings, and probably, 700 times as a superintendent, because I had a couple of years as a deputy and as an assistant. So I kind of know the nature of a board member. And I have this thing where I think I can be of value to the Northport community.
Mm-hmm.
Again, my focus would be on the learning experience of kids. But operationally, I know the issues when you're grappling with revenue shortfalls. We're struggling with this LIPA issue here in Northport now. Declining enrollment is something that we have to pay attention to.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
And so in 2 of my schools, I kind of experienced that, and I was pretty successful in grappling with that without sacrificing educational progress that we were making for kids and their learning experience.
Do you have thoughts on the situation with LIPA, or is that something that you don't want to get into?
Well, I probably know as much as anybody with respect to what's on the website. I don't know anything about any of the negotiations. I know that there was a promise that was made that the tax, there would never be an adjustment to the tax assessment, and that's pretty well documented. And to have that kind of pulled out underneath you is really something that is going to affect this community.
One way or
And
another.
yeah, one way or another. And it's not like a little thing. You know, I've had to deal with the revenue shortfalls of twice in my career, excuse me, 3 times in my career, I dealt with pretty significant revenue shortfalls. Once in the early 90s when the governor stopped state aid payments in January. And if you're a superintendent in a poor city school district, you have no tax money. I mean, you have it, but a chunk of your money is coming from state aid. So if that's frozen, there's no other well to go to.
Right.
And I've had to deal with shortfalls of 4 million, 6 million, which is really, really complicated to get through. We're talking 40 some odd million over the course of a couple of years, and that would be a tremendous impact on the school system. We have to be extremely strategic in how to grapple with that.
Right. I think I've read that the tax base in this area could go up by about 90%.
Well, they're saying that I think you got the 90% is that LIPA is saying that the assessment of the plant is 90% overvalued.
Gotcha.
I really don't know what the numbers would be in terms of that.
But you have thoughts about how we can handle this?
Well, you would have to, again, strategically, you would have to figure out how it's when you have declining enrollment, the opportunity you have is try and balance that with your revenue reduction so that you can reduce the hit. I also, I'm of the nature that when you have things of this complexity, that you really need to work with your community.
Why does Northport have a declining school population?
Well,
Are there many schools like that
Yeah,
now?
most of the schools in New York State are dealing with declining enrollment.
They are.
Yeah, the school districts that are having increased enrollment are usually in your city areas or near city areas, or where our immigrant population is coming in.
Right. So you have two things colliding in Northport: the issues with our power plant, LIPA, that is going to close, and declining enrollment.
Right. Those are
How
two
do you-
impact issues.
Right, but how do you make up that? There's I don't see how you can make up that shortfall.
Well,
other
I
than,
think
bake sales or something.
No, I think you have to start. From a strategic context, I think we have to build scenarios. Revenue shortfall scenarios. Since we really don't know what the impact will be, there could be a settlement in our future, or we could prevail in court. And if we prevail in court, I guess we're back to, square one again.
Right.
But still, declining enrollment is an issue by itself, and we owe it to our community that we have fully utilized school buildings.
Right.
You wouldn't want to have a building that's half utilized and have the community be taxed to keep that building running when you could run it more efficiently.
Right. When I sat with you the other day, we were talking about being on the school board, and you were talking about how it's important to collaborate.
Collaborate is key.
Can you describe some of the collaborations that how you bring that experience to what you want to do in the school board?
Yeah, well, number one, as a board member, you're not a board member until you're with your board. Otherwise, you're just an individual. And if you look at again, I'm going to come back to what I started from with this language of successful organizations or effective organizations. Those organizations, if they have trustees, their trustees trust each other. They work hand in hand. They understand particularly in a public entity like a public school system, things of this nature. The more you collaborate with the community and have them be active participants in grappling with the decisions and finding the information, researching what the issues are, in my experience, you will get a better product. You'll get better recommendations.
Right.
And people who have who participate in that have a sense of ownership of what those, and also they'll have a knowledge base of how this was studied, how we got to these ends.
Right.
And then there's a continual feedback loop, back to the community, informing them of our progress. But a board, as a collaborative team, It's taking from the principles of our Constitution. I mean, it's how we come up with the highest common ground.
Mm-hmm.
And when you work towards highest common ground, you generally will get to the place of a place of consensus that we all can agree on.
It's not easy though, because everybody has their own opinion.
Right. Right.
And then sometimes people like kind of put their stake in the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you deal with all that?
Well, one, when we're dealing about schools, it's not a, it's not a partisan relationship. It has to do with what's best for the people who are serving, and that's our students.
Right.
So you have to really work at getting to that, and that means for some folks, I've been really blessed, with the exception of 1 or 2 times. My boards have really worked well as in terms of collaboration, and we had very, very thoughtful and meaningful discussions where there were a lot of differences. And you ever read Team of Rivals, with Lincoln's Cabinet? I mean, it's kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of like that, except what's at stake is not as great as what Lincoln was dealing with, but in a microscopic kind of way, it kind of is like that. And in Northport, our Northport deserves a unified board in which it is working towards its highest common ground. It is more transparent, and our community is actively participating, in the process.
I wonder, is it kind of almost like a jury who's having to make a deliberation? You just have to sit there until you come up with an answer?
Well, the way I kind of approach it, I just go around and around and around with, when I facilitate something like this with my boards, and I've had some training in ontology, the language of organizations and what the relationships are, and I've done transformational planning with school districts. When we go through common ground and 100% consensus, what we're asking people is for them to explain why they feel a certain way, why they think this has bearing, what are the areas that they can move from. And we just go, and again, it's also learning the civility of the process.
Right.
That we are all of goodwill. And this is not about it's not about an I thing. It's about how we as a group, as a collaborative team, is going to best serve our kids.
Well, that goes back to what you were talking about before about looking through someone else's lens.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen when we're going through the consensus protocol with the board, I've seen people get really emotional in terms of seeing something within themselves that was a barrier, and they had to let it go.
Right.
So it's almost like it was like an insight. They.
Right, because it wasn't about the situation itself; it was more about themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's almost like therapy in a way.
It
where they
is.
had that
It's not
epiphany.
like I've seen some of my colleagues, not a lot. Like outside of the door, it says, "Leave your ego here." And,
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to bring all that in so you can get it out.
Right. So I'm somebody who I'm in college. I want to be a teacher, but I have thoughts. I think I want to take this really far. What kind of advice would you give them?
In terms of?
They want to go. Maybe they want to be a teacher, but they're thinking down the road that they'd love to get into administration and maybe run a school district someday.
Yeah.
Drawing upon your experience, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, leadership is an interesting concept. I mean, you could read about it and all that stuff. And but I think for a person who might, I think it's unusual for like a 22 or 23-year-old person to think, someday I'm going to be. I think you have to kind of progress to that. You evolve to that.
Okay.
You kind of go in steps. But one thing I would say to anyone who is looking at having a career as an educator is if you're working towards being a teacher, you will learn about your leadership in terms of how you teach. And great teachers who understand how kids learn and understand the process and the dynamics of working with 20 or 15, 20, 25 kids in one room at one time. There's a science to it as well as an art.
Yeah.
And it's beyond just loving kids. I mean, that's an important component. So what I always would recommend to young people as they're starting, number one, is to get yourself next to a person who is an exemplary teacher. And because that will give you some of the modeling that for you to observe on what an extraordinary teacher does in the classroom day in and day out. There's an economy of scale in a classroom that looks at, with great teachers, that they reach all kids. It's not the kid that keeps on raising their hand or,
Right.
or whatever. So there's a method to that. And then at the same time, how they measure their success. You know, how they're assessing kids as it's, they're learning as they're teaching.
Right.
And I think from there, if you have those qualities as a wonderful teacher, then you might want to say, can I go beyond a classroom? Can I be a principal?
Right.
Learn about some of the operational aspects of it, but the leadership part of it as well. And so as a superintendent, I fundamentally I superintendent as if I'm the teacher of the school system.
Right.
So like when I would do my superintendent conference days for the year, I would map them out for the year. I used the teacher's lesson plan, the exact lesson plan that the teachers use.
Right.
And I would lay out my plan for the year with my administrators and staff, and what is it that we want to accomplish this year? What are the strategies we're going to use, and so on.
So it's the same thing, just on a different level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just think I'm kind of like I try and role model,
Right.
and through my actions, what I would hope our teachers are doing in their classrooms.
I think we have a question.
You do. So Robert Rizzo has a question. Out of all the districts you've had an opportunity to work with, what would you say is unique about Northport that separates Northport from any other district?
Very good question, Robert.
Well, being a resident in Northport for 17 years, and my two youngest kids went through the system here and graduated, I think Northport has a strength of a community that is kind of unique. I don't want to say I haven't experienced that in my other school districts, but given where I live, I do see a real strong sense of community here. And I think, I don't know whether that separates Northport from the pack,
Right.
because I want to be really,
Fair
and honest about that. But I'll give you an example. When we were living in the Upper West Side and our daughters were going to a private school, one of the things I would explain to my wife is that they were going kind of like like an elite type school, and I would try and explain to my wife that I don't think they're getting nearly as much as they would in a public school.
Right.
So we came out here, and our kids were enrolled in Northport's school district, and the qualities here made a huge difference in their educational experience as well as their personal experience.
I have to say that I got a lot out of this conversation. Two of the biggest things for me, which I subscribe to, is it's so important to put yourself, and this is both things in one statement because it's a pun. You need to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
That's good.
Right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it also goes back to the other part of that statement is the shoe it to me is a lifelong thing for you, and that you're the metaphor of that is the fact that you're always aspiring to be the best.
Yeah, yeah. But you are too. I mean,
You're trying to be the best. Even if you're not, you're trying
Yeah.
to always get better. And is this good enough? And the example that that's set and what that means, the symbology of that, I think is very important. So, but, and I really appreciate you coming on. We're
thank you for thinking of me.
Yeah,
This was a surprise.
yeah, it was a surprise.
So can I tell you what my favorite quote is?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's from Michelangelo, and he was in his 80s, and he was trying to finish the Sistine Chapel, and he was being questioned, why is this taking so long? And he was trying to figure out how to make all this work, and he shouts down, and I have it in writing, I've kept it with me over the years, I'm still learning.
Yeah, right.
So that's the way I look at myself, really, as a learner.
Oh, he was in the Sistine Chapel? I wonder if he had a pain in his neck when he said that. I don't really know. My favorite quote is from National Lampoon's Animal House when they were at Emily Dickinson College, and the statue said, "Knowledge is good." So I don't have as much depth as you.
Did you ever see the Sistine Chapel?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's unbelievable.
It's crazy. And you have to like wonder, like, it's so long ago they did this. They didn't have the technology. They didn't have the tools. How did they do that?
I know, it's amazing.
And how did they do that without becoming crippled?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely incredible. And to keep the vision of the way he thought this was all going to fall out, it's
Yeah.
just incredible.
Well, if you ever want to come back, if there's something you want to talk about and you want to get out to the community, you're welcome to
Well,
come
thank
back
you.
here.
Thank you. This was very interesting.
Or if you want
And,
to come back with the board,
yeah.
like
Well,
if you want to come back and do like a panel discussion with the board here sometime, I'm happy to set that up.
I will keep that in my mind.
I'm
yeah.
serious.
Yeah, yeah.
And you broadcast it out to our whole community.
Okay.
So thanks. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
And I'll probably see you on the road somewhere in our cars. So anyway,
So
thanks.
what happens now?
So what happens now is I say next week, I don't know who our guest is yet, but we will have somebody. Beyond the Game is on at 7:30 with those humble and lovable guys, Mike and Corey Winkoff, those two lacrosse dudes. And we will see you next week at 5:30 p.m. on Monday evening. See ya.